Setting the scene. The narrator stands at the window of a small, rustic cabin nestled deep in the forests of Upper Canada. It's a familiar scene, the scent of pine wood in the air, the warmth of the crackling fire, and the soft murmur of old Christmas carols playing on the radio. The holiday season is fast approaching, and for the first time in years, it's their turn to host the family Christmas gathering. Across the country, relatives are preparing for the holiday, each in their own homes. Some are already packing for the long drive up north, while others are still finalizing travel plans. But the narrator has taken it upon themselves to prepare the cabin for the occasion, decorating the tree with old ornaments passed down through generations, hanging wreaths made from fresh evergreen, and preparing the guest rooms. There's a sense of anticipation in the air, not just for the gathering, but for the joy of bringing the family together after a long time apart. A perfect Christmas is just within reach. But the weather, as usual in these parts, has its own plans. The sky darkens ominously, a warning of the snowstorm that is already taking shape. Snowstorm and suspense. It's late afternoon when the first flakes begin to fall, soft at first but soon growing in size and ferocity. By evening the snow is coming down in heavy swirling sheets, the winds howling through the trees and rattling the cabin windows. The radio crackles with warnings. A severe winter storm is heading their way, and those who were traveling should seek shelter immediately. The narrator had spoken with their brother just an hour before, but with the storm worsening, he's called again, his voice strained with frustration. His car has slid off the road, and the highways are impassable. He'll have to stay at a nearby motel until the storm lets up. With the phone connection cutting in and out, the narrator hears him in the distance, his words fading as the wind picks up in the background. The narrator sighs and stares out the window, feeling a pang of loneliness as the storm intensifies. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Christmas was meant to be a time for togetherness, not isolation. But they resolved to make the best of it. After all, their brother will be there soon enough, and the family will gather as planned. For now, though, the house is quiet, save for the hum of the wind and the soft thud of snow piling up against the door. As the evening drags on, the narrator grows more restless. The cabin feels unusually quiet, almost too still, with only the storm's fury outside to break the silence. They put another log on the fire and curl up with a book, but it's hard to focus. The storm is only getting worse, and as the hours pass, it seems to press in around them, its sounds growing more unsettling. Suddenly, a sharp noise interrupts their thoughts, a faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the snow just outside the cabin. The mysterious visitor. The narrator's heart skips a beat. At first, they tell themselves it's just the wind or an animal, maybe a deer or a coyote. But the footsteps don't stop. They're slow, deliberate, as though someone is pacing just outside, circling the house. The narrator stands up and walks to the window, but the storm is so thick that visibility is almost zero. They call out into the darkness, "Hello? Is someone out there?" There's no response, just the relentless howling of the wind. Yet the footsteps continue, drawing closer to the front door. A knock shatters the silence, soft at first, then louder. The narrator hesitates. Who could possibly be out in this weather? No one should be foolish enough to venture into the storm alone. As the knock turns into frantic pounding, the narrator's unease grows. With a deep breath, they cross to the door and peek through the peephole. A man stands on the porch, his face barely visible through the swirling snow. He's dressed in an old, tattered coat, his eyes wild with desperation. "Please," he calls out, his voice muffled by the storm. "I'm lost. My car broke down. Can I come in?" The narrator's pulse quickens. Something feels off. They don't want to open the door, not to this stranger in the middle of a snowstorm. But what choice do they have? It's dangerous out there, and he claims to be lost. They shout through the door, "You can't stay here! The storm's too dangerous." There's nothing I can do. But the pounding continues, harder now. The man's voice rises, tinged with frustration. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he yells, banging on the door again. "Please, let me in. It's freezing out here." The narrator's hand hovers over the door handle, indecision gripping them. The man's voice grows more frantic, and for a moment they wonder if this is some kind of trick, if they're being set up, if the man has an accomplice waiting in the storm. But they can't be sure. There's a gnawing feeling of dread that grows with each passing second. Then, just as the narrator is about to turn away, the man says something that sends a chill down their spine. "I've been following you. I know you're in there." The words hang in the air like a thick fog. The narrator steps back from the door, their heart pounding in their chest. The storm outside seems to quiet for a moment, as if the world is holding its breath. Then the pounding resumes, faster, more insistent. The narrator glances nervously toward the window. Is anyone else out there? What does this man want, and why does he seem so intent on getting inside? With trembling hands, the narrator grabs the phone, but there's no signal. The isolation of the cabin now feels more like a trap. The storm outside rages louder, and the strange, desperate man outside continues to demand entry. What will the narrator do? How will they survive this long, strange night? Break-in and confrontation. The pounding on the door grows louder, more insistent. The stranger's voice, now tinged with desperation and anger, demands to be let in, but the narrator hesitates. Cold fear settles in their chest as they back away from the door. Something doesn't sit right. There's an urgency to the man's pleas that feels like a warning. They peer through the window again, but all they see is the swirling white chaos of the snowstorm, the man's figure barely visible against the vast, dark night. Then, without warning, the sound of breaking glass shatters the tense silence. The narrator jumps back, heart racing. The man has broken a window. Frantic footsteps now echo in the distance, closer than before. The narrator rushes to lock all the doors and windows, their breath shallow and erratic. The sound of footsteps inside the cabin sends a jolt of fear through their body. Someone is in the house. The man's voice calls out from the hallway. "I'm not leaving without help." The narrator grabs the phone, but there's no signal. Panic surges. They rush to their bedroom, locking the door behind them, and grab the gun that's stored in the drawer for emergencies. Their hands tremble as they hold it, the weight of the weapon strangely grounding them. The footsteps outside their room become louder. A second person is now in the house. 2 men. Their voices are low but sharp, and the narrator can hear them rummaging through the living room, tearing at drawers, flipping over furniture. "This place is full of junk," one of them mutters. "What do you think, the old man has cash hidden somewhere?" The narrator's pulse quickens. They hold their breath, trying not to make a sound. The floorboards creak under the men's weight as they move through the house. One of them is getting closer, the sound of his steps echoing down the hallway. The narrator grips the gun tighter, fighting to stay calm. The door handle rattles. The narrator's heart skips a beat. The man outside the bedroom door mutters something unintelligible, and then a loud crash echoes through the house as they break open a cabinet. More things are being thrown around, glass breaking, wooden chairs splintering. The men are ransacking the house. The narrator silently prepares to defend themselves, their mind racing through possible scenarios. They can't stay hidden forever, but making a run for it would be just as dangerous. There's no way out without confronting them. After what feels like an eternity, the sounds of movement grow quieter. The 2 men are now in the kitchen. The narrator hears a distant drawer being opened and the unmistakable sound of something metal scraping across the floor. Then, suddenly, silence. The door bursts open, and the men make a quick dash toward the exit. Footsteps retreat toward the door, followed by the sound of a vehicle starting up in the driveway. The narrator remains frozen in their bedroom, guns still gripped tightly in their hands, trying to make sense of what just happened. The house feels eerily quiet, the storm outside now the only sound that fills the air. The fear, the adrenaline, the sense of violation, all of it floods over them at once. The men didn't take much, just some cash, a few personal items from the bedroom, but it's the terror of the experience that lingers. A close call. The days following the break-in are a blur of shock and recovery. The snowstorm eventually clears, and the narrator is able to reach their family. Their brother arrives safely, though visibly worried about what happened. He offers to call the police, but the narrator insists they're fine, just shaken up. The break-in, however, has left its mark, and they can't shake the feeling of being watched, of being unsafe in their own home. But despite the lingering anxiety, Christmas goes on. The family gathers, and for a moment, everything feels normal again. The warmth of the holiday spirit fills the cabin, laughter, stories, the clinking of glasses, and the crackle of the fireplace. As the days pass, the narrator finds comfort in the presence of their family, yet there's still an undercurrent of discomfort. They reflect on how people can become desperate, cruel, even during a time when goodwill should prevail. The holiday season, once a time of peace and celebration, now carries a darker edge. The feeling of safety is fragile, easily shattered by the harshness of the world. A creepy family Christmas. Years earlier, another Christmas had left the narrator with an uneasy feeling that they couldn't quite explain. They were just 10 years old, a shy, introspective child who preferred to stay in the background, watching the adults laugh and talk over dinner. This year, however, the atmosphere was different. Their cousin's boyfriend, Drew, had come to visit, and from the moment he arrived, something felt off. Drew was charming, no doubt. He had an easy smile, a disarming way with words, but there was something about him that unsettled the narrator. He seemed too focused on their younger brother, Alex, who was only 7 at the time. Drew would find reasons to linger around Alex, helping him with his Christmas presents, talking to him quietly when the adults weren't looking, offering him treats when no one else was paying attention. At first, the narrator brushed it off as harmless, but as the night wore on, they couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Drew's attention was more than just friendly. Drew's eyes seemed to follow Alex around the room, and the more the narrator observed, the more the uncomfortable sensation grew. When Alex went to bed, Drew would make sure to check in on him before heading to his own room. Every movement, every word Drew said to Alex felt like an intrusion into their siblings' innocence. The narrator, too young to fully understand the depth of what they were feeling, just knew that it wasn't right. Later, that night, as the family was sitting around the tree, Drew insisted on joining the kids for their bedtime story. When Alex hesitated, Drew coaxed him, reassuring him that he could read better than anyone else. There was a strange, possessive quality in his voice that made the narrator's stomach turn. As Drew sat on the edge of Alex's bed, reading aloud in that soft, too familiar tone, the narrator knew something wasn't right. But just as quickly as it had begun, the discomfort passed, hidden beneath the layers of holiday cheer. Drew left the next day with a promise to visit again soon. But for the narrator, the unease lingered long after he was gone. Years later, the pieces of that holiday came together, revealing the truth about Drew and the kind of man he really was. But in that moment, as a child, the narrator could never have known what lay beneath the surface of that unsettling Christmas visit. That holiday season, too, had its own darkness, one that would stay with them forever, a quiet whisper in the back of their mind every time the holidays came around again. Unsettling discovery. Christmas Eve had always been a magical time in their family, a time for warmth, joy, and togetherness. But that year something felt different, as though a shadow was creeping into the holiday cheer. The narrator had gone to bed early, eager to wake up to the excitement of Christmas morning. But during the night, they woke suddenly, their heart pounding. Something wasn't right. They glanced around the room. Everything was still. But then they heard the softest shuffle from outside their bedroom door. Curious, they crept out of bed, quietly opening the door. The house was eerily silent, and a thick chill hung in the air, unusual for a night that was supposed to be filled with warmth. The hallway was dark, and when the narrator reached the living room, they froze in shock. There, in the middle of the snow-covered front yard, stood their younger brother, Alex. He was bundled up in his pajamas, barefoot, and his wide eyes were fixed on something, or someone, standing in the darkness. The figure was Drew. Drew, who had always been so friendly, so charming, seemed different tonight. His face was shadowed, and his voice, when he spoke, was eerily calm. "Come on, Alex," Drew coaxed. "The night's still young. Come play with me." The narrator's stomach dropped. Why was Drew out there with Alex, so late, in the freezing cold? Why was he encouraging their younger brother to be outside, alone, when they should have been celebrating Christmas with the rest of the family? Alex, too young to understand, shuffled closer to Drew, his hands clutched at his sides. The narrator felt the overwhelming urge to call out, but they were paralyzed by a strange mix of fear and confusion. The cold night air seemed to freeze the words in their throat. They wanted to protect Alex, but couldn't bring themselves to speak up, to confront Drew in that moment. Instead, they watched in silence as Drew turned toward the house, his hand gently urging Alex to follow him. The moment felt like a cruel dream. When Drew finally led Alex back inside, the narrator silently retreated to their room, shaken but unsure of what to do. They told themselves it was probably nothing, that Drew had only wanted to make Christmas memorable for Alex, but deep down the unease lingered. A terrifying Christmas morning. The morning sun crept in through the curtains, gently waking the narrator. It was Christmas morning, the day they'd been waiting for all year, filled with anticipation and joy. The house was alive with the sounds of family waking up, laughter echoing through the halls. The narrator's heart should have been light, but the weight of the strange events from the night before hung heavily in the air. They moved into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, a warm smile on their face as they thought about the cookies left out for Santa the night before. After all, it was a family tradition. The kids would leave a plate of cookies, a glass of milk, and a handwritten note just to make sure Santa knew they were well-behaved all year. It was a ritual they never missed. As they entered the living room, their smile faltered. The plate was empty. All the cookies were gone, except for one, the half-eaten cookie they had nibbled on before bed. They froze. The narrator's mind raced. How could it be? They had clearly seen the plate full the night before. They glanced over at their young son, who was already bouncing with excitement, his eyes wide as he pointed to the empty plate. "I saw him, Mommy," their son said with a grin. "I saw Santa. He was eating the cookies." The narrator's skin prickled. Something wasn't right. How could their son have seen Santa eating the cookies when they had only gone to bed a few hours before? The idea that Santa had come, eaten the cookies, and left seemed impossible, especially since no one had heard a sound during the night. It felt as if something or someone had been moving through the house unnoticed. "Are you sure, sweetie?" the narrator asked, trying to remain calm. "Yes, Mommy, I saw him," their son insisted. "He was really tall, and his suit was so red. He smiled at me." A chill ran down the narrator's spine. This wasn't just the excitement of a child's imagination. There was an odd certainty in their son's voice, one that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. The unease from the night before began to fester again. What had really happened? Investigating the basement. As the day wore on, the oddities only grew. The narrator couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. They kept replaying the events in their mind. The strange behavior of Drew, the disappearance of Alex in the middle of the night, the empty plate of cookies, and the discomfort grew with each passing hour. In a moment of desperation to understand what had happened, the narrator decided to investigate. Their eyes wandered to the basement door, an area of the house that had been largely unused for years. It was cold and damp down there, and no one ever really went into the basement anymore. They'd stored old furniture, broken-down boxes, and forgotten holiday decorations in there, but that was all. The thought of venturing into the basement, however, made their stomach tighten. Yet, something was pulling them toward it. Something wasn't right. With a deep breath, the narrator grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and descended the stairs into the dim, musty basement. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and dust. The floorboards creaked underfoot, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The beam of light swept over the forgotten boxes, scattered papers, and broken chairs. It all seemed so normal, yet something was off. The sound of something scraping against the floor made the narrator freeze. Their heart raced. The flashlight flickered as they slowly turned toward the noise. Behind a stack of old boxes, they saw a shadow, an outline of something large, breathing heavily. It was faint at first, but the sound of breath grew louder, deeper. A cold sweat broke out on the narrator's forehead. They inched closer, the beam of light trembling in their hands. Was someone down here? Was it Drew? The breathing stopped. The narrator held their breath, trying to hear over the pounding in their ears. Then, just as quickly as it had stopped, the sound of a soft shuffle came from behind the boxes. It was deliberate, slow. The narrator's mind screamed for them to turn back, but they couldn't. With a burst of courage, they shone the flashlight directly behind the boxes. But to their horror, the space was empty. There was no one there. The breathing had been a figment of their imagination. Or had it? They quickly backed away, the hairs on their necks standing on end. They didn't know what they had just experienced, but it was clear. Something was wrong. And the mystery of that Christmas would continue to haunt them for years to come.